It's really great to be here in Barcelona. I've been a part of LSI since its inception, so it's always just a great event. So PRIA Healthcare, just as an introduction, is a full-service US-based reimbursement and market access consulting company. We work with Medtech innovators early on in the process to really establish and understand the market in the US specifically, and then really develop and carry out the reimbursement and market access strategies. So I'm pleased to be here today with my esteemed panelists, and we're really excited to talk about neurotech innovation. Just to kind of introduce the topic, there's been an influx of innovation in the area of neurotechnology for the treatment and monitoring of neural disorders, including epilepsy, Alzheimer's, PTSD, and depression, and then to really even enabling movement of a limb through brain-computer interfaces, or BCI. So in its simplest definition, neurotechnology encompasses all technologies developed to understand the brain and visualize its processes through established modalities such as EEG, functional MRI, or implantation of microneedles. These technologies can even control, repair, or improve its functions through methods such as transcranial electrical stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and deep brain stim, or DBS. As the innovation in this arena increases, questions around the ethical, commercial, and social aspects of these technologies have really come to the forefront as of late. Specifically with high-profile leaders entering the space with BCI-enabled technologies. I think we all know who I'm talking about there. And the emergence of neuro rights has come into play, which really seek to protect a person's brain and mind. So it's an emerging legal aspect, right, of these as well. So in our session today, my esteemed panelists and I will explore these issues in more depth and provide their own perspectives, viewpoints, and expertise. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Ken?
Sure. Hey, thanks, Tonya, for leading the panel. Ken Mariash, I'm the CEO of Sinaptica Therapeutics. We're developing a non-invasive network neuromodulation system for Alzheimer's. Unprecedented phase 2 clinical trial results, better than any drug that at least I'm aware of. And I got a background at Baxter, Boston Scientific, and consulting before that.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Angela?
Hi, my name is Angela Liedler. I'm CEO of PRECISIS, located in Heidelberg. We have invented the world's first minimally invasive brain pacemaker for the treatment of epilepsy patients. It is according to the MDR and CE marked already.
Thank you. Anna?
And hi, I'm Anna Maiques. Welcome to Barcelona, which is my city, so I'm very proud and happy that you're all here. And you'll recognize me if I wear my famous cap, because otherwise nobody knows who I am. So here it is. This is a wireless, non-invasive neuromodulation technology called transcranial current stimulation. It also has an EEG, and we are in 2 clinical trials, one in epilepsy, a pivotal phase 3 in the US, another one in depression. So we hope that one day doctors will be able to prescribe home use of this as a therapy to deal with brain diseases.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna. Carolina?
Carolina Aguilar, thank you. I'm from Madrid, so you will be aware about the Madrid-Barcelona thing.
But in this case, love each other, don't we?
In this case, Barcelona adopted me. So I'm the CEO of INBRAIN Neuroelectronics, and we develop a graphene-based high-density and high-resolution intelligent neural network for central and peripheral nerve applications.
Great, thank you. Great panel here. So the first question I really want to explore, and this is a hot topic, especially for this meeting, is funding, right? So it is the focus of this meeting. With the promises of innovation in this space, and the promises of BCI applications in particular, what funding challenges do you believe are unique to this space as opposed to other disease areas such as cardiovascular, ophthalmology, et cetera?
I would just start by saying there are challenges, but there's also huge opportunities. This is one of the hottest areas in medtech. I mean, we're apart from the Neuralink and the Synchron and even the Cognito round. There was another company that went public recently, Neumora. A lot of companies are getting a lot of traction in this space, device and drug, because of the level of unmet needs. Some would call this the century of the brain. And whether it's AI or ML or BCI or neurotechnology in the brain, I think this is where it's one of the hottest areas in medtech, despite the downturn in funding. That doesn't mean it's easy. There's lots of challenges, but relative to other spaces in medtech, I think we're one of the hottest spaces.
Great. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here, right?
Exactly.
Anybody else?
Yeah, and I think that, for example, in the Boston area where we raised our first Series A, I think traditional life science investors in the Boston area tend to do a lot of biotech. Neuro was already hard to raise money, but if you add neuro and medical device, I think it was a very hard area to raise money from. But I think that in the last years, and I don't think it's only because of Elon Musk and Neuralink, I think there are phenomenal companies like Synchron and other great companies that are doing great rounds of funding, and I think that's raising the interest of a lot of life sciences investors. My main investor in the Boston area is a traditional biotech investor, but he did this medtech and neuro. So I hope we can see more and more investors looking into medtech and neuro.
Yeah, if I may add, what is a fact is that 1/3 of the population is affected and less than 10% get therapy like ours. So there's definitely more budget that needs to go into the development of understanding the brain. And I think it's happening. I am also in agreement with you. We see definitely a change. In our case, we had a lot of support, but even from non-traditional investors like the European Union has put so much focus, starting with a human brain project, 1 billion, then, in our case, graphene flagship, and now supporting really, really much entrepreneurship. We have been lucky to actually receive 3 of the calls that the European put forward for funding, and it's a matter of having also the ambition to go and get it, right? So definitely there is a change, and we hope to see more so we can address more the need.
Oh, great.
And I would like to add that I think the whole field of the brain or the neurology is a little bit too broad to answer that question. So to my experience, it was quite advantageous that we talked about one neurological disease. In our case, it's the epilepsy and the treatment of seizures. So that's a very small, sure, but very precise defined field. And for that, saying that it's the 4th most neurological disease, then it was quite easy. It was never easy, but it was easier to get funded for treatment of a very well-defined status. Yeah.
A specific patient phenotype
specific,
and disease.
yeah.
That makes sense.
And I think then disease is the one thing and timing is the other. I mean, I think everybody, is very scared of conducting clinical studies that last for 3, 4, 5 years. And therefore, I think it's easier to have shorter studies conducted, yeah,
Right.
and funded.
Great. What are some challenges that were unique in terms of the product development and even regulatory and commercialization journey that you all have experienced, and what was there any unanticipated challenges?
Well, and I think we have people in the room like Lothar and the TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, people in the room. So as an entrepreneur, when you have an idea or a technology, you start with the science, and then you think that the big barrier is regulatory. But once in your regulatory, you start to think about reimbursement, or at the same time, and then you see that that mountain is even higher, right? So some people spend more time and money in reimbursement than in the regulatory strategy. And then you have the market access, right? So I think there are these huge obstacles, right? And with time they change, but you always see them as a moving target, right? Or so I think that for the entrepreneurs in the room, I think that the earlier you start to think about, reimbursement, regulatory, market access, partnerships, I think is really important, and resources. And I talked about this morning at 7:30 in another panel, but resources like the Biodesign Center in Stanford, where they have this consortium of experts that help entrepreneurs navigate those difficulties, I think are super worth it when you're starting. And that these advisors, they are paid by the FDA in the case of the pediatric consortium, they have been for my company an incredible asset, right? People that have done it before or been there, or people from the industry. in this room that can help you navigate those challenges.
That's great.
And
In my case, we are developing a class 3 device, and therefore I find that it's difficult to find the balance between what you integrate on your value chain, what you really do by yourself, versus assembly suppliers or production suppliers that you might integrate on that chain. And I think it's also a matter of the budget that we are going to be able to raise, because I will definitely prefer to integrate a full value chain and control everything, also from the quality perspective and several other aspects. So I don't think yet we have the perfect infrastructure to scale at that level, but I think as the need is there, the budget is flowing, and we are more and more, and the talent is also coming, I think we will see also a difference on how do we develop these products.
Yeah.
to me, it was surprisingly helpful how the communication with the notified body flew. So we got advice, as you said, we got advice not only around the study protocol, but in the meantime, what happened, and they were highly supportive. And I feel these notified bodies here, I only speak about the EU, got better and better over the past years. Very helpful. Yeah.
And you've had a lot of success,
Yeah.
Angela.
Yeah.
And I would just add that under breakthrough designation, which we have, the interactions with the agency has been very, very good. With a non-invasive therapy, of course, the bars are lower, so there's not as many questions around safety. But I would echo, what others have said about reimbursement is really the key. And there's this huge disconnect between the drug world and the device world. I've lived in both. And you saw what happened with Aduhelm, and there was a huge uproar over CMS slapping down the entire space of anti-amyloid drugs. And then later, 180 degrees, they decide to cover lecanemab with very little conditions, and even go as far as covering some of the ancillary services related to the infusion of that drug. So can you imagine, you in the device world, reimbursement on day one? It's unthinkable in the device world, whereas the average time that we're out there, I think it was the Stanford study that said it's about 6 years to coverage. You would know more than anyone, right?
6 to 7 years.
6 to 7 years. So to try to raise money and to try to cross that desert landscape in a cash pay environment until that coding and coverage is in place is a huge challenge. And it starts way before you even approach investors. You got to know how you're going to cross that. How you're going to cross that bridge. We actually recently commented on the TCET. We sent our comments in, and we pointed out the gross disparity. It's almost like a double standard between the drug world and the device world, and we'd like to close that gap.
Right. Yeah, very different processes in the U.S. for drugs versus devices, and what Ken's referring to is breakthrough designation with FDA. If you have that for your technology, you have certain reimbursement benefits that exist today. And then there's a new proposed regulation by CMS called TCET, the Transitional Coverage of Emerging Technologies. That is in a proposed state. But essentially what CMS is proposing to do for a very finite number of technologies is cover for a certain period of time, pay for and provide coding to specific devices that have breakthrough designation. So again, that is just in a proposed state. You just said you submitted comments, which everybody submitted comments. It's a very important rule, but something to definitely watch and think about as you are developing your reimbursement and market access strategy for the U.S. And it is very different in the U.S. We have a very fragmented system. But and I know that you all have breakthrough designation. Congratulations. That's a great feat. And if the TCET does go through, or just looking at the benefits right now from reimbursement, from the payment structure, are you intending to capitalize on those and pursue those avenues?
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. If there's ever a poster child for the ideal breakthrough for a CMS population, so 90% of Alzheimer's patients, it should be no surprise, are Medicare beneficiaries. And sorry for the US focus, but that's where my mind is. There was never a better poster child than an Alzheimer's therapy. whereas the drugs cost $26,000 a year and require MRI monitoring every quarter, and all the testing that goes into the workup. It could easily cost $80,000 to $100,000 your first year on one of those drugs, whereas our therapy will be a fraction of that with almost no side effects. So, yeah, I think we have a good chance at achieving that breakthrough designation coverage in the first 6 months of approval. But if they're only covering 5 products, that's not enough. They need to go farther.
Agreed. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think we are doing worse in terms of reimbursement because when we applied for breakthrough designation, you had this guaranteed reimbursement, and then when Biden came to power, that disappeared. So that's why I'm saying that it's like a moving target and a moving mountain, right? Like, so let's see. I mean, I think lobbying in Washington is always a good idea, and people underestimate. But I think that these policies will affect our companies. So I hope that we'll take advantage, but I hope they will extend them right in time because before it was like perpetual in a way.
Yes, yeah. At what point would you recommend innovators think about and start strategizing on market access and reimbursement?
Oh, from the beginning.
Yes.
I mean, also because you have to answer your investors. They are going to ask you that right away,
Yes.
right? So you definitely need to, in your business plan, that needs to be figured out from the beginning, yes.
Agreed.
And you might not know everything, but that's why we have experts like you to support, especially when we are not native from, for instance, in my case, US. However, you have to understand what's going to be your business model and what you can count or not, of course. And I think we also have a responsibility to innovate. I think by now maybe you know that I'm a fierce defensor of value-based healthcare and how we could in the future pay per outcomes and not per devices. And I wish to push that forward in my generation. So
Yeah, through a value-based type of structure. Yeah, versus fee-for-service. So speaking of outcomes, clinical and economic data are paramount. It's required, right, for medtech innovators to show and to demonstrate the value of their technology, support their claims for all stakeholders. What unique opportunities and challenges and ethical considerations, right, have you experienced in demonstrating the value and executing these clinical studies?
May I start?
Yes, please.
I mean, the first hurdle is that you need the consent of a patient who is aware that he might be an eligible patient. And in epilepsy patients, that was not always the case because sometimes there are the parents around and sometimes there are caregivers around. So, and we set that up quite well with the ethical committees, but we were not allowed to mix children and adults in the very first study. So we had to conduct 2 different ones with adults first, obviously, to prove safety and efficacy, and only after safety was proven in adults, then we were allowed to jump into a children's study. So it just took time.
Definitely.
It took time. And when it comes about what is outcome, I mean, it's obvious that efficacy must be proven, but is efficacy in our case only reduction of seizures? Is it more? Is it economic data? Is it gain of quality in life? Things like that, but we did it very straightforward and reduced it then to just reduce seizure infrequency. And I think that helped
Yeah.
in the beginning.
We have an interesting ethical dilemma. So we're targeting mild to moderate Alzheimer's patients who, by definition, are declining, right? So astoundingly, we're able to slow the disease by 82%, at least as measured by the primary endpoint, but not 100%. So they continue to decline. And then, of course, sham patients really continue to decline. So the question is, if we enroll a patient at a mini mental state exam of, say 18, and they decline down to 16 or even 14, that patient is arguably not able to consent. Right. So when we do our flip to open label extension, they can't consent anymore. Now, a lot of these patients have caregivers, so that's great, and in our study we'll have caregivers, but it poses really interesting ethical questions about, at what point you really have to have the caregiver take over and and do all of the sign-off.
Yeah, and it seems very specific, of course, to the disease state,
Yes,
right?
it is
I mean,
very.
Yeah, but just to add, when I first was approached by a neuroethicist, and there are a number of them that have been working in the neurotech space for some time, these are mainly academics, like Ann Wexler or Karen from Pennsylvania. So I thought that because we were following the FDA rules, we were taking all the ethical issues into consideration, and I was so shocked by some of the questions they posed. One of them was, Anna, do your patients hold autonomy and identity and agency when you stimulate them? And I was like, that's not a requirement in any of the FDA trials, right? So I started to get involved in the neuroethics community. And I think if you think about companies like Neuralink or consumer, we are all in a very highly regulated space, right? But I think there are going to be major questions for the millennials. Will you allow a device to be implanted in your brain for consumer use? And does it affect your agency, your identity, or who you are as a human? That's why Rafa Juste wants it to be in the Bill of Rights of any constitution, the right to protect your brain. But I think these are fundamental questions. And after what I have seen with social media, now with ChatGPT, I'm not super trustful on the humankind. So I don't know. I think that the brain is actually the next frontier. Dealing directly and tapping into your brain, I think is another dimension. And I don't know if it should be regulated or not, but for sure has to be oversight and explained to the consumers. You want to type faster, you want to be smarter, but somebody's going to have a direct access to your brain. It's not like having a social media account that you can disconnect, right? So I leave it in the room. How many of you would allow an implanted in your brain for enhancement? Oh, we are old, I guess.
Yeah, consumer is the one thing. Probably it's more difficult to answer these questions. But when it's about a disease, people are far more open. And when they are conscious, when they are suffering, then they're really open to accept things. And I'm a medical doctor. I find certainly all these regulations very hard to overcome, but I find they are okay because they, the original idea was to protect patients and to not let implants go because you want to accelerate your performance or something like that. But the idea was to treat severely suffering patients. And we have a class 3 device implanted in heads in severely ill patients. And once they benefit, then it goes on and gets multiplied, that the acceptance gets higher over time. Yeah. Sorry for that, but I'm completely against putting implants into healthy volunteers or in whatsoever.
So maybe is it for performance, or is it really to treat a debilitating condition?
Yeah.
Okay, but there's a crossover. There's actually a gray area that's upstream of Alzheimer's or MCI, mild cognitive impairment. So in our research, we've shown the ability to increase memory by a substantial amount in healthy normals. So 20% to 30% increase in memory. Now there's a multi-billion-dollar industry out there for nutraceuticals and nootropics that so-called enhance your cognition. We actually can do that. So the question is, should we then start to move upstream of diseases and into the elderly patients who want to maintain their brain health? Pre-MCI, MCI, I could use 20% more memory.
Me too.
So it's some interesting questions there. Now that doesn't involve putting a lead in the brain, so it's a little bit less of a lift, but we are really changing the brain by stimulating it.
Definitely. Carolina?
Yeah, Lothar and I know a very relevant neurosurgeon that always says common sense is the least common of the senses. And this means that, we have all different values, and what is acceptable for you might not be acceptable for me. So definitely there has to be a guideline that regulates this in a very straight way of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And of course, it has to be consented and it has to be broad. But there has to be something, a benchmark that we will all compare to, because otherwise it's going to be very random and not protective enough for the human beings.
Yeah. So Neuralink just started their first in-human trial, as I think we all know. Would you enroll yourself, or would you enroll a family member if you qualified?
So, look, I'm going to say something controversial.
Go, Carol, go. Shake them.
I know the guy is questionable, but he has always delivered on what he promised, right? And we needed a bold company, and of course it's easy to say than do, because of course having 500 million helps. That's how the investment is going in Neuralink. But I think it's going to get to a place that is going to be opening new frontiers, and it's going to take time. I wouldn't take the first generation. I will wait a little bit more. But we are here for difficult, and we need to help each other. You know, on the COVID vaccine, you know, there's people that said, I'm not going to do it. But, you know, I think the ones that we took the vaccine, we were brave. And I thought that I was supporting also the science. And I knew maybe it was not fully tested. And maybe, you know, it would have consequences in the long term, because it was really not fully tested. It was an epidemiological, clinical test, right? But hey, we went there, and, you know, we did it also for the sake of humanity. So I think sometimes we have to take leaps of faith and make this happen. Of course, we also have to regulate, right? Like FDA should be on top of Neuralink, like it's in top of everybody else, right? But, you know, I think if I need it, I would, and I hope that he will do it if I develop mine.
Yeah, and I think Carolina is right in the sense that he has put the spotlight into our field. I mean, many of us have been working in Neurotech for a long time, right? But the fact that he entered the field, I think, has raised a fresh interest in the field, and he's phenomenal in explaining what he does, and, you know, so I think that overall, you know, when we were to the Exports Control Conference, I mean, even the government called us all as a field to, you know, so I wonder if that would have happened without him entering into the field. So I think it has benefited all of us to have the spotlight in Neurotech.
They're excellent points. Angela?
Again, I would say certainly I would take part everywhere where benefit gets promised or is quite likely to get. I would like to point out something else. I think to do not harm with any implant is something very important as well. Certainly we do want to bring whatsoever consciousness better or something, but we should prove that we do not harm in other aspects. And I think that is at least as important as doing the next best treatment or outcome. You see, when we talk about the DBS system, the brain stimulations, then they can be very efficacious in whatsoever tremor treatment or something like that, but they have quite difficult side effects when it comes to mood or so. And I think we should learn from others and not only start from scratch in every country. So I think the communication and the cross medial exchange is very important, so that we can learn and share what we have. Yeah. I mean, my biggest fear is that we cause whatsoever depression or something like that when we do benefit in the other side of the head.
Ken, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So, yeah, if I was locked in, of course I would want the BCI.
Yeah.
You know, if I had a spinal cord injury and was partially paralyzed, you know, probably that too. But if I'm just a consumer who wants to enhance myself, I don't know, it's a big risk. But it raises questions of, you know, we can now use more non-invasive modalities too to monitor the brain. and we're learning how to speak brainish. It takes a lot of ML and a lot of signal processing to be able to understand and deduce what the thoughts are coming off an EEG. But if you show a criminal a visual of a random house and look at their EEG, you will see a very different reaction when you show them the scene of the crime, of the house where they committed the crime. And therein lies the ability to potentially read somebody's thoughts. That poses all kinds of ethical concerns. Of course, that's a criminal, right? But I'm a marketer. I would love to be able to read someone's mind. But as a human, I would much rather that my preferences be inferred and implied, not actually read from my mind. So no, I wouldn't sign up for that.
Okay. Do you think that BCIs go against the Hippocratic Oath?
It's like everything, right? In the right way and to benefit on health, it's not, right? I think if we start driving Teslas with the mind, I will be more concerned. But that's why we are talking about frameworks that need to be implemented and enforced.
Yeah, one of my advisors, I don't know if in the room you know, is Niels Baumer, who is one of these really talented researchers that work a lot with locked-in patients. So there is people that don't have means to communicate. Their brains are intact, and their bodies don't allow them to communicate. I suggest you read the Diving Bell book about the lock-in patient. So I think that technology in there, if you think of Steve Hawking or all these people with neurodegeneration or muscular atrophy that their body cannot help them to communicate, it's great. Or Onward, another great company, right, for spinal cord injuries. So I think we have hundreds of benefits, but also the press only brings the scary, terrible ones, right? So I think that there is also a responsibility to show how useful BCIs are being today, right?
Yeah.
And how safely you can step in. It's only step by step, and that is good. I mean, very often we do not have animal models for brain diseases, yeah? And therefore we have to go into humans very early. And then I think the only solution can be do it step by step, very small little steps, safety first, then benefit, and then learn from each other, yeah. But enhancing cognition is something huge already to me.
We are enhancing you naturally. That's what you should be in conferences.
Can you speak to the evolution of stimulation modalities to neuro or network modulation, and what considerations are at play for these new modalities?
Okay, thank you for the question. That was a nice tee-up. So neuromodulation to date has been all about you stimulate one nerve and you get a particular response. I'm obviously oversimplifying it, but it's a linear process, right? We are now stepping into a new era of neuromodulation where it's not about nerve modulation or even a particular part of the brain modulation like STN or GPI. Now we're talking about network neuromodulation. So we're stimulating the default mode network, which has projections to the frontal areas, to the angular gyri, to the parietal lobes and the hippocampus. It's a big distributed network. And we're doing it dynamically. We're adjusting, maybe not in real time, but we're adjusting over time to learn how the brain reacts. It shouldn't surprise anyone that everyone's brain responds differently to stimulation. And so we have to titrate that and dynamically respond and evolve over time. So I think we're starting to think more about system modulation instead of just hit a nerve and get a response. You could apply this to vagus nerve stimulation maybe if you made it more kind of adaptive. We're getting to see, sensory driven DBS closed loop. Now we're seeing closed loop stimulation in saluta with closed loop stimulation in the spinal cord. So the point is we're looking at systems and networks, not individual nerves anymore. And that raises so many questions of complexity because to read that data requires ML. To get that precision requires targetry. To visualize where you're stimulating and to sense a response requires very sensitive sensors for what you're doing, and the ability to load all that data into the cloud and then see changes over time and be able to develop algorithms that drive that stimulation. So long story short, we're moving into a new era of network neuromodulation is my view.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, our FDA breakthrough was on network decoding and modulation, so I could not agree more. And it has been a dream since I was little, actually, and I was never understanding why we were modulating nuclei and not taking into account all the rest of the brain, and even beyond the brain, right? At the end, we have a central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system, and there are millions of circuits that correlate those two systems. And if we want to really get the full potential of humans in healing, I think we need to understand the full connectivity between central and peripheral. That's what we are also doing with INBRAIN and Inervia, trying to understand how things connect and how to decode better. And I think it's happening with artificial intelligence. It's all about networks. It's happening with chips, neuromorphic chips that also mimic the neural networks. So at the end, I hope that all this understanding of the brain is going to help also other systems.
Yeah,
Fully agree.
that's a good point.
I do not like the term stimulation. I mean, when it exactly what you say, we apply bioelectronic pulses into a system, yeah? And sometimes we have acute and sudden effects, but sometimes it takes months, even years, until a modulation it gets apparent or gets caused. So, and I think when we now come to talk to the public or to patients and we want to grow patients' awareness or confidence in these new therapies, I think we should look for another term, because only a few patients want to get stimulated. Most of them want to get cured or whatever, yeah?
Also, they don't want to,
But not stimulated.
and not deep ills also. So.
And certainly the term is there, but let's change it a little bit to a better acceptance in patients.
I agree.
Yeah, and one thing that we are trying to do at Neuroelectrics, and I hope we succeed, is building these, we call them neurotwins, but these are computational models of the brain in the cloud. So instead of stimulate, can you simulate? So instead of using the human as a test bed, can you just do it in the cloud, understand how the brain works from an electric perspective, simulate? So you have Alzheimer's, how will you respond to this? So I think that would apply also to the drug world, right? Like before you prescribe and then come back in 3 months and let's see. I mean, can we use artificial intelligence for the good use of really simulating the response of the brain to different treatments and personalize in ways neuroscience hasn't been able to do before because it's so difficult.
Yeah,
So-
she's building an amazing model. I'm such a huge fan of that work.
It's hard.
I know.
So anyway.
We definitely have some evolution here, not only in the terminology, but just the
Yes.
whole arena. So this has been great. We're almost out of time, believe it or not. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give the audience a quick couple of key points. Carolina, can you just start, please?
I think as entrepreneurs, we are here to do difficult, right? So our responsibility is to push the next frontier of neurotech for the well-being of humans, and we are all going to be patients. So I hope that you all progress and help me when I'm, you see me old. So yeah, that's my message here.
Yeah, and I think in my case, we are preaching, to a very kind audience, but I would love the healthcare system and in general the bio world to understand that there may be new ways to deal with brain diseases other than drugs. And, in the Egyptian times, they used to take fish from the river and put them on their heads to deal with pain. So the concept of electricity in our history has been there since the Roman times. And so I hope that we, our companies, will be able to show to the world that there are other novel ways to deal with the brain because patients are suffering and what we are delivering today is not enough. So I hope we succeed.
Angela?
My sentence or advice would be, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are a startup, then talk to your notified bodies, talk to your ethic committee as early as possible. It takes years until they understand what you are doing and what you want to achieve. But once you have them in your boat, then it's good. Yeah. but it takes a long time.
Yes. Ken?
Just parting words, I think we're entering a really fun time, an exciting time where we're going to see neurotech development start to encroach upon drugs. And you see this with like set point and vagal nerve stimulation. It's the biggest class of drugs, the anti-TNF alphas. And set point has a therapy that could really rival those. And we're starting to see that in other areas of neurotech too. You know, not just Alzheimer's, but we're starting to see them one by one, sort of those two worlds collide a little bit. And so bioelectronic medicine is one way to think about it. It's one term. But yeah, fundamentally, I believe that the frameworks for reimbursement, as I said before, there needs to be some equivalence there because it is a double standard between the device world and the drug world. They need to come together.
And start the reimbursement planning early.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody in the audience for attending. This is a great conversation. Thank you to all the panelists. So excellent dialogue and excellent points. So thank you.
Thank you,
All
Tim.
three.
Thank you.
Thank you.